Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be moderating this discussion today on important topics such as Turkey. And as David said, thank you all for joining on the day where we celebrate Purim, and we hope to bring a few smiles sometimes to each other in these challenging and very difficult times. Turkey is a large and strategically important country located at a crossroads between Europe and Asia. And in recent years, Turkey has faced a number of challenges related to its political, economic, and social development. Following the devastating earthquake that took place now a month ago and resulted in over 45,000 people who lost their lives only in Turkey, many of these challenges will now affect Turkey even more and probably even faster. To discuss the Israeli rescue mission sent to Turkey and how it was welcomed and seen on the ground, the upcoming dramatic May election in Turkey and the impact it might have on foreign policy, and to give us a more clear image of where is Turkey today, a month after the earthquake, but also in general, we have with us Dr. Eytan Yanarocak, who is the Turkey analyst at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and at the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies at the Tel Aviv University. He holds a PhD from Tel Aviv University School of History and is a lecturer at the same institution and at Ben-Gurion University. He's also the editor of Turkeyscope, Insights on Turkish Affairs. So let's first discuss the aftermath of the earthquake and what caused it to be in such large scale. It was reported in the media that the cause of such devastating numbers of building collapsing and people losing their lives was also due to corruption by the Erdogan government. Administration, which resulted in bag or wheat construction and led to an estimated cost of damage of $34 billion. What can you tell us about that?
Okay, first of all, dear Daniel, allow me once again to thank you for having me in this distinguished forum. It's an honor for me to speak at FELNET's forum. So I would like to provide some background information about history of earthquakes in Turkey. Unfortunately, Turkey is a home for two important fault lines. These are called Northern Anatolian Fault Line, and the second one is Eastern Anatolian Fault Line. If you're gonna look at Turkey's map, you will see that 71% of Turkey is basically located on the fault lines, which basically turns Turkey into an earthquake country. When we are looking at the history of the Turkish Republic, the first ever devastating earthquake took place in 1939 in eastern Turkey called Erzincan. Then approximately the casualties also reached to a similar level, like more than 40,000 people. And after that, we always had some earthquakes, but the one that really shook Turkey and Turkey was very much devastated was in 1999. Then I was also living there in Istanbul, and I experienced myself that particular earthquake, unfortunately. Then I was 15 years old. My two cousins, unfortunately, we lost them during the earthquake. Then the Israeli rescue teams, they got their bodies from the rubbles. It means that earthquake is a trauma also not only for the Eastern Turkish citizens, but it's also a trauma for all Turkish citizens at large, and especially for the Turkish Jewish community. For instance, if you're gonna go to Turkey's Jewish community synagogues today, you will see that under every seat you will see a helmet. These helmets were put there to protect the congregation from earthquake, for instance. I just wanted to give you an insider's information. And of course, 1999 was a milestone. 1999 was a milestone because Istanbul was devastated. Approximately 17,000 people were killed. So the government began to enact some important laws. For instance, they enacted a new tax called the earthquake tax. And all of the citizens began to pay this tax. The reason was, thanks to this tax, the government would have the opportunity and ability to provide necessary services in case of such a natural disaster. But unfortunately, in the last earthquake, we happen to see that all of these earthquake tax money disappeared from the Turkish treasury. And when people ask, for God's sake, from 1999, we paid every month this earthquake tax. Where is this money? So Erdogan told the press the money was spent to the places that had to be spent. Okay, I'm quoting again. The money was spent to the places that had to be spent without giving any accountability, anything. But what we understand here, whoever ever visited Turkey, I guess they are very much familiar with grandiose infrastructure projects like new bridges, subway lines, or new airports, or new highways, etc. So, of course, in order to sponsor all of these grandiose pharaonic projects, you need money. And as far as I understand, Erdogan thought that during his term, an earthquake will not happen. But he was mistaken. I would also like to remind our audience that Erdogan's political party came to power in 2002, which means that he came to power because of the negative results of the 1999 elections. So nowadays, the Turkish opposition parties are saying that Erdogan came to Turkey with an earthquake, and hopefully we will get rid of him with another earthquake, okay? In 2009, I would like to continue and provide you information regarding the most important laws that were legislated by the Turkish parliament regarding earthquake. In 2009, the Turkish government founded the Disaster and Emergency Movement called AFAD in Turkey. You know, in Israel, we have this Home Front Command, but in Turkey, Erdogan seeks to demilitarize the Turkish state, so he doesn't want to use the Turkish army for these kind of rescue missions. So he basically founded this civil body, which proved itself in a very negative manner. I mean, they really disappointed the Turkish public during the last earthquake. They could not provide necessary services in the real time. They were very insufficient. So there is also another important, I mean, there is also very severe criticism, a very serious criticism against Erdogan's government. In 2012, he legislated another law called Urban Transformation Law. He began to demolish old buildings and began to construct new buildings. In the same year, he also legislated the Construction and Supervision Law. It meant that he had to supervise all of these buildings, and in case of a building was not built properly, so they had to evacuate the building and they had to demolish it and to reconstruct it, right? But what has happened was the exact opposite. The people did not evacuate their homes, and the people, they did commit some unlawful acts regarding construction. For instance, I would like to give you a very common example that the Turkish people experience. For instance, if I'm an owner of a three-flatted building, okay, and my building was designed only for 3 flats, right? 3 floors. So let's imagine that I will independently take a decision, and without getting any authorization from the municipality, I would add 2 more floors to my 3-floored building. So my building became 5 floors. Okay. So, but my building was designed to carry only 3 floors. So now I have 2 additional floors. Okay. So the municipalities wanted to demolish these kind of buildings, but in 2018, before the elections, Mr. Erdogan came and he said that we are going to legislate a new pardon for those who committed these kind of crimes in the construction sector. So he basically provided kosher certificates, for these kind of unlawful buildings, and he turned them into legal. How you do that? You're paying money and you are receiving your land registry as a kosher building. Okay. At the end, what has happened was the buildings which were built properly, they stood, and the ones that they were, they were not built properly, unfortunately, they collapsed. And I think this number that you mentioned, 45,000, right? I think this is not a reliable number, because let's imagine together that approximately more than 120,000 buildings were collapsed. Okay, if each building had 5 floors, and if each 5 floor had 4 different apartments, and if in one apartment lived in an average 4 people, so the number should be devastating. I mean, unfortunately, maybe hundreds of thousands people. So many people. For instance, I would like to give you a very concrete example. In the province of Hatay in southern Turkey, there was a very famous building called Renaissance. And in the rubbles of Renaissance, people thought that they're supposed to be 80 bodies, but none of them were retrieved. Why? Because nowadays, before the elections, Mr. Erdogan is very much busy with cleaning the rubbles to start the reconstruction. So, as far as I understand, all of these bodies were thrown together with the rubbles outside of the cities. So people cannot find the bodies of their relatives, because Erdogan needs, very, very fast results before the elections. He needs to show some concrete achievements. He says that, one more sentence and then I'll stop. Apologies that, I'm talking. He is insisting that even if this earthquake took place in a Western country, in Japan, in Germany, whatever, this would create, again, a similar disaster in these countries, because he said that, this is something exceptional. Okay. And even we could build our buildings better, it wouldn't survive. So he's trying to emphasize the concept of destiny, but of course his opponents are emphasizing and highlighting the concept of science, which means that if you build a building properly, so that building can survive the earthquake. So now I stopped here.
As you mentioned, there were a lot of faulty planning and a lot of mistakes done on the way. But so the elections are now in 2 months or so, the 14th of May.
Indeed.
And so obviously the elections are going to be more or less around the earthquake. How united is the opposition? Mm-hmm. And what's the outcome of it? What will happen if Erdogan will lose? And will he even maybe not hold an election, called a state of emergency, or
Okay.
what's the possibilities of?
First of all, I would like to mention that even if there is a state of emergency, it is not an excuse for Erdogan not to have elections. According to the Turkish constitution, the only way to cancel an election is declaring a war to another country. Okay, so as long as we do not have a war with Greece, Iran, Cyprus, etc., etc., he has no such an excuse. Okay, under the state of emergency, the Turks, for instance, I would like to give you a concrete example. In 2017, in Turkey, there was a referendum that turned Turkey from a parliamentary state to a presidential state. There was a referendum, and that referendum took place under state of emergency because a year before, the country was devastated because of a failed coup attempt. Maybe we all remember the July 15th, 2016. After that failed coup attempt, we happened to see that in Turkey there was a state of emergency, and under the circumstances of state of emergency, the Turkish people went to the ballot boxes. Of course, it's a huge problem for legitimacy, because during the state of emergency, you can limit people's fundamental freedoms, such as demonstrating, such as, for instance, you do not place these ballot boxes in every village, but you ask the rural people to come to the city centers to vote, and most of them will not do that because it's like 2 hours going to the city centers, etc. So in terms of legitimacy, it's very problematic, but it's not impossible. Okay, and regarding your question regarding the opposition, in Turkey, there are two different pacts of opposition. Their common denominator is only not Erdogan. Maybe this slogan is very familiar for you. Only not Erdogan. Okay, we made some references to the Israeli politics, as we had here Raklo Bibi, right? Only not Bibi pacts. So in Turkey, we also have only not Erdogan pacts. But we have two different pacts. And the reason is, in one pact, we have the Kurdish party and other very leftist Turkish parties. And on the other side, we have another pact, which is ran by the secular party, Republican People's Party, which is considered as a center-left party, supposed to live in a coexistence with the Kurdish party. But the problem here in that pact derives from the Turkish nationalists. There is another party called the Good Party, in Turkish İyi Party. The members of the İyi Party are not willing to sit together with the Kurds. So that is why we are talking about a split in the Turkish opposition. And besides that, the Turkish opposition parties failed to produce a charismatic leader that could unite all segments of the Turkish oppositional
So if I'm understanding correctly from what you're saying, Erdogan has his chances in 2 months, and quite sort of likely that he will win this election again.
Of course. And it is not because Erdogan is a fantastic guy. It is because the opposition really, apologies for my language, but they really suck. They fail to unite. They fail to deliver, and they fail to rally around the flag, thanks to a very charismatic figure. For instance, I would like to provide another important example. According to the latest surveys, the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, and the mayor of Ankara, Mansur Yavaş, are considered far more charismatic than the leader of the Republican People's Party, his name is Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Okay, but since Kılıçdaroğlu is leading this opposition pact, okay, so he believes that he deserves to lead the opposition party, okay, the opposition bloc at large.
Yeah.
And he's not letting the mayor of Istanbul and mayor of Ankara to run. For instance, last night, the leader of the Good Party, İyi Party, they told that they are leaving the opposition bloc because Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu is not allowing a more charismatic leader to lead the way for them. Okay, so this is a problem because we still don't know even today. Now, while I'm delivering this lecture to you, another meeting is going on now in Turkey. They are trying to persuade the leader of the Good Party, Meral Akşener, to come back to the table and to find a common ground with Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu so that they will produce a unified candidate that could be supported by all segments of the opposition. So it's very complicated, very complicated.
While these negotiations still happen, let's continue with the scenario that Erdogan wins again, right? And as we said, Turkey is between Europe, between Asia, and even regardless of the earthquake. My question to you is, did the Russian invasion of Ukraine ended Turkey's balancing act between Russia and the West? Because now Erdogan, let's say he wins again, and he needs now support, aid, and he has a lot of approximately 2 million displaced people in Turkey. He needs Europe's support, but also there's a rapprochement with Saudi Arabia that has now dropped billions of dollars.
Indeed.
In Turkey.
Indeed.
What's next for Turkey's foreign policy?
Okay, so it's a very complicated question because Turkey cannot divorce from its imperial past, meaning that when you're looking at the history of the Ottoman Empire, the only empire, the only state that could pose an existential threat on the Ottoman state was the Russian Empire. They were the only ones who could came to the outskirts of Istanbul to invade the city. I'm not talking about the First World War, because in the First World War, of course, the British did invade Istanbul. That's another issue. I'm not talking about that, okay? So the Turks, that is why they wanted to become a member of NATO. They wanted to be protected under this Western umbrella because they saw Russia as an existential threat. But besides that, under Erdogan, Turkey also launched a rapprochement with Russia. And the reason is because of Erdogan's increasing authoritarianism and increasing Western criticism against Turkey. So Turkey is not criticized by Vladimir Putin or by Xi Jinping when he is diminishing the Turkish democracy, right? When he is limiting the rights of the people, like right to demonstrate or to write an article, etc. Right? Criticism, right of criticism. So he began to feel much more comfortable with the Russians and with the Chinese, and he began to conduct a rapprochement towards Shanghai Cooperation Organization as at the same time. So he basically adopted a policy like being a multiplayer, being able to speak with Russians, with the Chinese, with the United States, with the Arabs, with everyone at the same time. So Turkey, while trying to open a dialogue channel with the Russians, they are also providing UAVs, unmanned air vehicles, to Ukrainians so that the Ukrainians can kill as much as they can. I mean, they can kill Russians, right? As much as they can. So it's a very ambivalent game.
But now Turkey needs Europe's support as they need to rebuild and reconstruct. So where does it put Turkey in the in the sense of their opposition, for example, for Sweden's application to NATO. They opposed it, but now they need either NATO or the West's support to rebuild. Where does it put them?
I agree with you. The case of Sweden and Finland is very complicated. And, you know, the Swedish and the Finnish administrations, they had a miscalculation. During the 1990s and even during the, you know, like in the last decade, they always criticized Turkey because of Turkey's extraterritorial operations, for instance, in Syria, Iraq, etc. But why is it a miscalculation? Because at the end, Turkey is a NATO country, right? And if you would like to become a NATO member, you have to get the approval of each country. Otherwise, you cannot become a NATO member. After the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian forces, both Sweden and Finland, they made a very important shift in their national security paradigm, and they declared that they would like to become a member of NATO. But Turkey said all of a sudden, okay, if we are allies, then please extradite the 120 people. These are the names A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Please extradite them to Turkey because we consider them as terrorists. Who are these people? They are Kurds. They are anti-Erdogan opposition people like Gülenists, etc.
Right. So do you see this changing now that Turkey needs more of Europe's help?
The thing is, Turkey began to pose some conditions to Finland and Sweden, and we see that both countries, I mean Finland, are trying to satisfy Turkey, and Turkey has a more positive stance vis-a-vis Finland. But when we are speaking about Sweden, the story is totally different. I would like to remind the latest incident that took place in Stockholm, that a Danish far-right politician burned the Quran next to the Turkish embassy. And for the Turks, this cannot be explained with freedom of expression. Okay, this is a hate crime. And I also believe that this is a hate crime if you ask what I think about this issue. And the most important evidence for that, the day after, another demonstrator group wanted to burn the Old Testament, Sefer Torah, right next to an Israeli embassy in Stockholm again, and the authorities did not allow them. So I'm asking you a question as a Jew. Okay, why did you allow the burning of Quran, and the day after you are not allowing the burning of the Old Testament, the Torah? So in my opinion, in both occasions, you had to say no. Okay, you should not burn Quran, you should not burn Sefer Torah. I do not think that it's related with freedom of expression. But when a Turk, an ordinary Turk, sees that Sweden is providing a green light for burning the Holy Quran, and Sweden, the same Sweden, a day after is saying no for the burning of the Old Testament. Right. So it's a double standard. It creates antagonism. And just think about, just try to enter to Erdogan's shoes. You consider yourself as the patron of all moderate Muslims. You consider yourself as the grandson of the Ottoman Empire, of the Ottoman Sultans, and you are burning a Holy Quran next to a Turkish embassy, which means that you are turning this issue into a religion, into a religious and a nationalist, challenge for him. So you cannot ask Erdogan to digest this easily. You will not see anything happen. Regarding Sweden's membership, you cannot expect anything from the Turks before the elections. Forget about it. They will not do anything. And after the elections, if Sweden would like to proceed, so it's not only Sweden, the US should provide Turkey F-16 planes. Maybe maybe our audience is familiar or maybe not. I would like to provide you in a nutshell. Turkey equipped with S-400 anti-ballistic missile systems, and because of that, the United States imposed on Turkey military sanctions.
Right.
So Turkey was expelled from the F-35 Joint Striker jet project, and as a result, the Turkish army's inventory only solely relied on the F-16s. But because of the ongoing sanctions, they cannot even get any spare parts of these planes. So Turkey already paid for F-35s, but it did not get any F-35s. So Turkey is at a junction. Turkey is saying, or give us our money back that we spent for F-35s, or if you're not giving our money back, so with that money, please give us F-16s.
Right.
But there's the sanctions. So here we need Congress's approval. But the Congress is very much driven by the Greek lobbies. Once upon a time, the Jewish lobbies were interfering for the good of the Turkish state because of the good relations. Now the Jewish lobbies are not intervening, and the Greek lobbies can pressure the US administration as they like. Even the Biden administration is saying that we are willing to provide F-16 planes to Turkey. Because of the Greek pressure, the Congress is not giving the green light. So Turkey is saying, unless we are going to get the F-16s, we will not give a green light to Sweden, to Finland. From their perspective, this is their only concrete opportunity. If we are going to exploit this, we will get what we want. And if we are not going to give a green light, if we are going to give a green light, it's lost. So,
Right.
yes.
So before we get to a cross-Atlantic agreement and the F-16 flying from the Atlantic, let's address Turkey's closer neighbors, such as ourselves, Israel. How
Yes.
do you see at FELNET? We also hosted an event with them. The IDF sent a rescue mission immediately after the earthquake. And they helped obviously the aftermath of the earthquake, but also it was this in the media today that there was a Hamas cell that was discovered that were based from Turkey, and they were found out by the Shin Bet in Israel.
Yeah.
So how do you see now Israel's relations with Turkey in the context also of the war in Ukraine, the rapprochement with Iran and Russia?
Okay, so first of all, I would like to remind that Turkey became the first ever Muslim state that recognized the state of Israel in 1949. Of course, today we are all celebrating the Abraham Accords, but never forget, we even did not have to sign an agreement to have proper relations with Turkey. So we should cherish that. We should be very grateful from the beginning that Turkey then took a very bold step, okay? This should be the fundamental that we should never forget. If we are coming to today's relations, of course, in my opinion, the decision makers in Jerusalem, they did not forget their negative experiences with Erdogan. Our government is not a naive government. We know that Erdogan is not a computer that you can reset and you can install a new software which will be more friendly towards the state of Israel. No. It is not. The reason that Turkey normalized her relations with Israel is because of the deteriorating Turkish economy and because of the success of the Abraham Accords. Turkey understood that even after the departure of Donald Trump from White House, that these Abraham Accords are not collapsing, they are not disappearing, and if they are not going to become, if they're not if they are not going to make their foreign policy compatible with this new reality, they would be the outsiders in the Middle East. So if you're looking at the Turkish foreign policy during the last 2 years, you will see a domino effect normalization policy. Like first in November 2020, 20, they normalized their relations with the United Arab Emirates, and all of a sudden with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and then with Israel during the last World Cup in Qatar, Erdogan shook hands with Egypt. This is not a coincidence, okay? But this time, Israel was a part of a larger picture. That is why, for the first time in our entire bilateral relations history, Israel could pose conditions to normalize relations with Turkey. For the first time, we gained something from this stance. I would like to remind, when we are looking at the history of the relations, we are seeing that every time Turkey deliberately downgraded the relations for reason ABC. I'm not going to get into that right now because of their own national security matters, especially focused on Cyprus. It's such a long story. Okay, I'm not going to get into that right now. But then when Turkey wanted to mend fences, Israel always ran to Turkey's arms without any conditions. This time, for the first time, Israel said, we want something. Israel said, we want, for instance, the end of the Hamas's activities in Turkey. In return, the Turks only provided a partial solution to that. Some Hamas members were sent out of Turkey, they were expelled, but still, we still have, unfortunately, Hamas terrorist cells inside Turkey. The Turks are saying that these are dormant cells. They are not engaging with terrorism, which is a huge question mark for Shabak, okay, for the Shin Bet. And the concrete Israeli gain from here happened in the aviation sector. If I'm not mistaken, it was 2002 or maybe 2001, the Turkish Aviation Agency legislated a new regulation then. They did not allow any other security official to carry weapons unless they are Turkish. And that is why the Israeli aviation firms like El Al, Israel, Arkia, they stopped flying to Turkey. Only then we had El Al flying to Turkey.
Yeah.
And only the Turkish Airlines, Pegasus, Anadolu Jet, they began to enjoy from this very delicious pie of this market. If you're not familiar, I want you to understand Turkish Airlines' most profitable station in the whole world outside of Turkey is Tel Aviv. It's not because the Israelis are coming to Istanbul only, because Israelis are changing their flights in Istanbul, and they do continue to other destinations via Istanbul.
So,
okay, so in that thing, Israel gained for the first time this new privilege of carrying weapons inside Turkish airport terminals, and that is how this Yisrael flights began to resume to Turkey, and this is a concrete success for the Israeli side.
So this is more government to government, even economy to economy. But let me ask you this. First of all, how did the IDF Home Front Command was greeted by the locals in Turkey? That would be interesting to know if they were greeted in a, knowingly they're coming from the IDF. And second of all, the big elephant in the room of what David mentioned at the beginning of our call is what's happening in Israel right now. And we know how Turkey's situation, what Erdogan has the reform that he did in the past. How is that seen also from them, from that end? Yeah.
Okay, in a nutshell, Israeli Home Front Command's arrival was celebrated by the Turkish people, but they cannot understand something. They are asking, why are you sending soldiers? Because, as I said in the beginning of my lecture, their teams are citizen teams. They are not soldiers. They are not using their army. So they are very skeptical, and they do not like to see army people other than the Turkish army soldiers are, hanging around in their cities. Okay, this is something cultural. This is related with patriotism and very strong nationalist instincts, etc. Okay, they do not understand why Israel is using its army also in these kind of rescue missions, but still also in the Turkish institutional press and also in the Turkish social media, Israeli rescue teams activities were very much appreciated, and they were praised, not once, not twice. It was very visible. Of course, there were some, by default, unfortunately, anti-Israel people. Also, we have them in Turkey. We had an unpleasant incident last week. Maybe you can Google and see it later, but I will, in a nutshell, I can sum up. In the province of Hatay in southern Turkey, we had a Jewish community that consisted of 17 people, 17, right? 17 people. And unfortunately, the synagogue in the Hatay province was damaged, and the leader of the community, together with his wife, unfortunately, they passed away because of this earthquake. We could not save them. And the Israeli teams took them out of the rubbles. So the first incident that there were rumors that Israel only dispatched the rescue teams to the region only to save the Jews. Okay, this was the first conspiracy theory. And the second conspiracy theory happened when, basic mathematics, 17. Unfortunately, we lost 2. We have now 15, right? 14 of them, they were transferred by the Turkish Jewish community that is located in Istanbul by a plane. They were moved to Istanbul, and we only had one Jew that did not want to leave because it's his own city and he wanted to stay there. And he had a Megillat Esther that we're supposed to read it nowadays because of Purim. I assume that we all know what is Megillat Esther, a scroll that the Jews are reading to commemorate the story of the Purim, right? And it's not a historical one. Maybe it's like 70 years old or 80 years old. Let's say 100 years old, okay? But you cannot call this as a historical artifact. So that Jew gave this Megillat Esther to a Zaka volunteer, to an Israeli volunteer who came there to save the lives of the Turkish people. And that Zaka volunteer came back to Israel, and he was interviewed to Yediot Achronot, the Israeli newspaper, to Ynet News, and he showed them, look, we also saved the lives of the Turkish people, but we also saved this Megillat Esther that we took it from this province. At that time in Turkey, there was a huge noise that occupied the most trending topics of Twitter, that Israeli team came there to steal the national artifacts of the Turkish state. Until we clarified that this was not a historical artifact, and every religious Jew has a Megillat Esther in their home, and if you are, if you are buying an old book from an old second-hand bookstore, this is not considered as a historical artifact. It's not like the Qumran Bible that is preserved in the Israel Museum, etc. So the Turkish state did understand it. So we have no problems with the Turkish state. But unfortunately, the Turkish people began to exaggerate this, in my opinion, the nice story, the Megillat Esther that survived the earthquake. They turned this, unfortunately, into anti-Semitic hate speech. Okay, and this created a very uncomfortableness among the Jews who were living in Turkey, etc. But apart from that, I saw many Turks who put Israeli flags on their cars, on their Twitter profiles. I received many messages, despite the fact that I'm an Israeli citizen, but I speak Turkish mother tongue level since I was born and raised there.
Right.
So people began to send messages with "thank you." I did nothing, right? I'm like you. I sat here in Tel Aviv. I was in the university, but I got these messages of thank you, and I think this was a very successful public diplomacy act. I would like to also congratulate the Israeli Defense Forces, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but of course, whether you like it or not, the Israeli government, we should also congratulate them, because unless they could provide a green light for this rescue mission, we would never see such pictures. So in a nutshell, I think that was a huge plus for the relations. And besides that, the second part of your question regarding the current status of the Israeli democracy and Turkey. Look, unfortunately, in Turkey, there is a very deep polarization. And unfortunately, I began to see this very deep polarization also in Israel. I really don't like it. I really don't like the language that both of the camps are using. For instance, when I'm seeing my prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is using the word anarchists for peaceful protesters in the heart of Tel Aviv, it is reminding me Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who used similar language to the peaceful Turkish protesters at the Gezi Park protests during 2013. I really dislike it. Okay, and I'm telling you this as a person who in the past voted for Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay, so I'm very speaking very sincerely, okay, that it is very much disturbing me. And in 2010, Erdogan declared that in Turkey he called for a public referendum, and in 2010 a similar judicial reform took place in Turkey, where Erdogan nowadays are nominating judges, the vast majority of the judges, through Ministry of Justice, through the parliament, through himself. And we cannot say that in Turkey the judiciary is not independent in Turkey at all. Judiciary is like another stamp to satisfy the government. Okay, so that doesn't mean that in Israel we do not need a reform, because now I would like to have this opportunity to criticize the Israeli Supreme Court, that I think they also did some wrongdoings. In my opinion, for instance, in Israel, we had a law for those who infiltrated into Israel from other countries, right? Why are we all using passports? When we arrive to Israel, we all present our passports and then we are entering the country, right? Because that's what the law is saying to you. But unfortunately, from our border with Egypt, especially, and from the Jordanian border, etc., there were many infiltrations. The Israeli government wanted to get rid of some of these infiltrators, or the ones who infiltrated, or the ones who wanted to get the status of a refugee. Okay, and this created a very problematic sociological atmosphere, especially in the southern suburbs of Tel Aviv, especially in Shkunat Hatikva neighborhood. And since the government was very much supported in these neighborhoods, it wanted to legislate a law to extradite these unlawful people in Israel. For instance, the Supreme Court canceled the legislated law 4 times. Okay, so and the reason was not the unlawfulness of that particular law, but it was the, you know, in Israeli law, the Supreme Court has the ability to take decisions on the ground of reason. Okay, in Hebrew we say this ilat hasvirut. Okay, a judge can take also decisions if it's reasonable or not reasonable. I think that particular example, the Israeli Supreme Court exaggerated its jurisdictional powers, and it basically invaded into Knesset's jurisdictional area. So what I want to see as an Israeli citizen is the middle way. I do not want to see my government to nominate all of the judges, but I want the Supreme Court not to interfere in every political decision that is taken by the legislator. I think all of the powers should respect to each other. What Montesquieu said was the separation of powers. Okay, if we are criticizing the Israeli government to steal the jurisdictional powers of the judiciary, I think we should also say the same for the judiciary. This current status cannot continue, okay? Whether you like it or not, the right-wing political parties will not withdraw, okay? And we have to we have to make a compromise. We have to meet in the middle. And in my opinion, the fact that the current government is passing all of these laws in the first round, in Hebrew we say kriya rishona, is to project seriousness to the other side that we are willing to do it. But I want to believe that this seriousness, this demonstration of seriousness would be understood by the other side, and they would come to the conclusion that the current status quo cannot continue. But I really hope that they will come to next to a table and they would make some, concessions, not what the current government is projecting, like the current status of the reform is very, very, very, some of its parts, in my opinion, are very problematic. But two sides, in my opinion, I know that I'm not a popular choice nowadays because the people are divided like soccer teams, and they are becoming very fanatic like soccer teams. But sometimes you should compromise. Okay.
So I think we will take
what
your
I
call.
think.
I think we will take your call on compromise and on moderation and end on a happy note after counting numbers of people who lost their lives in Turkey and facing our challenges here in Israel.